Hey everybody! Today we're going to talk about the setup choices that we made for the February Fallout race at Radioactive Speedway. Hey there everybody! My name's Jeremy Caston. I am Cole Caston's father and mechanic, and we just wanted to take a few minutes and show you some of the setup options that we had on the car when we went to Radioactive Speedway. He was able to TQ and win, so we feel we had a pretty good setup on the car. Comfortable to drive for him and consistent. So let's go through the car and see what we got. So we didn't do anything, really out of the ordinary. We just made a few changes, mainly because the track was such a tight track. It's a small indoor clay-based track, had a lot of traction, a lot of tight corners, not a lot of long straightaways where you can get any speed up. So with those things in mind, we made just a few changes to the car to keep the car as flat as possible, meaning not a lot of chassis roll. We didn't want the car to move, to roll a lot. We like to keep the car pretty flat on tight tracks, not allow the suspension to travel a whole lot, but more let the car rotate and slide around so that he can get around those tight 180s and tight corners. So basically what we did from our standard setup is in the front we went with the 9.0 turn springs. They're the 1.6 millimeter, but they're the 9.0, which the stock springs are 9.5 turns. So the smaller number of turns on the springs makes the spring stiffer. So we stiffened up the front end with the spring package. We went with just one of the spacers at the front of the upper arm, the rest of the spacers behind, which basically gives the car less caster. It will make the car a little bit quicker reacting. May not be quite as stable, but it's a little small track. It had a lot of undulations in the track, so it wasn't going to be a very stable track to drive on anyways. So the extra steering enabled him, hopefully to navigate those tight corners a little bit quicker. And going back to the rear of the car, we kept the stock Ebuggy 9.75 springs, 1.6 millimeter, 9.75 turns, which is about as stiff as you can get with the 1.6 millimeter springs. And they seem to work really well, controlled the amount of weight transfer to the rear really well. And also was, they were stiff enough to keep the car pretty flat in the corners. We also went with the least amount of rear toe that we could get on the D plate with the pills, so that way the car had less rear toe, which is less rear grip, again in an effort to keep the car fairly free and rotating in the rear. Kept the same sway bar on. It's the 2.5 millimeter rear sway bar. Kept the camber links on the tower at the lowest position on the inner row of holes on the shock tower. Another thing that we did for this track, and that we typically do pretty much everywhere, but I don't know if you can see inside there, but we did run the optional aluminum rear hubs. They do have the adjustment holes where the hub mounts to the rear suspension arm. We did run those on the bottom hole, which lowers the car in the hub, raises the hub up, however you want to look at it, same thing. But that does raise your rear roll center, and that is another way to help keep the rear of the car flat, not allow as much weight transfer or body roll. So again, for most of the tracks that we race on, unless they're very, very rear low grip tracks, the majority of the tracks, the way Cole likes the car to be somewhat free, we almost always will run the hubs in that location. and if we need a little bit more traction, we typically will adjust with the sway bar or you know, the hubs or another way to gain some rear traction, but we typically do run the lower hole on the aluminum rear hubs. There's other ways to kind of get to the same place, but that's kind of what we're comfortable with. So that's basically it with the suspension and the roll center. The setup sheet's posted online as well, so I'll post it down below in the information about this video. I'll post a link to the setup sheet on the Speed Bull website, so that you can take a look at that. But it's, you know, geometry is pretty similar to what we would normally run with the options that I just mentioned. Okay, so when we get to how we felt the best way to keep the car driving straight, driving forward, pulling out of the corner nice and straight, we went ahead and ran a really small pinion gear. We ran a 13. As you know, the pinion and spur, the combination of the gear ratio, will determine how fast the tires are going to spin. So if you have a longer track, bigger track, you're going to run a bigger pinion gear or a smaller spur gear, either way. But going with the stock 46 tooth spur gear, we went with the smaller pinion gear so that we could slow the tires down, since the track didn't allow the car to go very fast. It was, you know, a smaller track, very little straightaway. When you're coming out of a hairpin corner on a small track like that, the car is not going very fast at all. So when you're grabbing full throttle, it's applying that power directly to the center diff and to the tires. So it's hard to get a lot of traction when these motors have so much torque. They will blow the tires off the car. Basically, they're going to spin through the traction. So we wanted the tires to go about as slow as the car, if that makes any sense. You know, so we didn't want the tires to try to go 80 miles an hour if the car was only going to go 30 miles an hour, just because that's all that the track would allow. So we did run a slow pinion gear. Now, obviously on bigger tracks we'll run a bigger pinion gear, but we did that intentionally to slow the tire speed down closer to the speed of the car. Also, with our diff setup, we went a little bit softer so as not to, again, blow the rear tires off the car. We ran 5,000 in the center diff, where typically we would run you know, or from 7 to 10,000 depending on the traction and the size of the track. So this diff setup is 5 in the front, 5 in the center, and then our typical 4 in the rear. Could have gone probably 3 in the rear. That might have made a little bit of a difference to allow the rear end of the car to rotate even better. But 5 in the center helped keep the majority of the power going to the front tires, and not going to the rear tires when the car is coming out of a corner and all the weight is on these rear tires. We didn't want these tires to get a lot of the power from the diff. We didn't want them to be spinning as the car is accelerating out of a corner at 5 miles an hour. We wanted the front tires to be pulling the car out of the corner. So again, we'll alter the diff fluid as we have more speed on the track, more corner speed. You can push more power to the rear tires without blowing, you know, spinning those tires, blowing those tires out from under the car. So it allowed the car to be easier to drive. You know, you got to kind of find that balance of making the car fast with applying power to both the rear and the front. The center diff oil going up in the viscosity will push more power to the rear, but and that will make the car fast if you have enough speed and enough track and grip to accept that power. But the car will always be easier to drive as you soften the diffs and allow the power to go to where the car is lightest. So the front end of the car is lighter, and more power will go to the front tires, pulling the car out like a front-wheel drive car. It pulls from the front instead of pushing from the rear. When you're pushing as you're exiting a corner and your rear tires are pushing the car, it's almost always going to try to push the rear of the car ahead of the front of the car, and then you feel like your car's really loose. and you want to change a bunch of stuff, but really you're just putting a little bit too much power to the rear tires, and you're pushing the car and spinning the tires as it's trying to catch up to the front end. So that's basically it. We ran the VRP 5-hole 1.5 millimeter pistons. We like to keep the oil light so that the car will stay on the ground as it's going over the little humps and bumps in the track. These VRP pistons do work really well in these cars where you can run a lighter fluid to allow the car. It's cold in my garage, so the fluid is thicker now than it was at the race, but we like to run the fluid light so that the car can very quickly move up and down over the bumps in the track, but yet the pistons do have some additional pack, just the way they're designed with the flaps. So when the car has to land off of a jump or has any kind of sharp or fast compression, you know, where the pistons are going fast through the shock, the car will generate enough pack to not chassis slap, not hit the ground and bounce up, things like that. So we ended up with 450 weight oil in the front shocks and 425 weight oil in the rear shocks. That is the majority of what we did. Can't think of anything really out of the ordinary. Pretty standard. Again, check the setup sheet, link down below to the Speedbull website. Also, if you like the video, go ahead and punch that like button. If you have some questions, just type them out in the comment section, and you know, I'll go back and answer them for you, or we'll prepare another video that will address any questions that you have. But we'll be doing some videos, and hopefully the weather will start to warm up so we can get outside and race, and also it won't be so darn cold in the garage, so that I can get out here and do some videos without having to bundle up so much. But we appreciate it, and we will see you guys next time. Until then, soar on.